You know, this is the Advent season for most Christian believers. It is a season that paves the way for Christmas. So what comes to mind during this season? During Christmas? Well, depending on our culture, it's perhaps about gifts, mulled wine, the hope of a nice kiss under the mistletoe, games, family gatherings, lunches, dinners. Although, mind you, COVID-19 will once more limit dramatically, I think, such activities this year. But there is also a spiritual wavelength to this date. It is, after all, the birth of a Jewish man, Jesus, and not only about mince pies, about EastEnders, I'm a Celebrity, or strictly special editions, about roasted chestnuts or marshmallows. It is primarily also about one of the three monotheistic religions of this world, about Christianity, no matter its divisions. So welcome today to Intuitive Reactions, the MENA and Gulf regions, and this is my number 37. Now, for me, this season leading up to Christmas and then the celebrations at Christmas and New Year itself have had an ever-changing veneer to it. During childhood, when I was a little kid, it was always Bethlehem that was the key attraction. Dad would take us in his six-cylinder car, and I mention six-cylinder because it was fun being in the car. We'd go to the Basilica or the Church of the Nativity in Manger Square in Bethlehem and light a candle, say a prayer, breathe in that sense of special feeling that you get when you are in that church, which then had not yet been restored. So it was pretty much dilapidated, if my young memory serves me right. And then once we were done with church, Mom, Dad, and I would go and walk in the city center and stop at a falafel seller for a sandwich. The falafel man was a patient of Dad's, so we would get the VIP treatment, perhaps a bit more of pickled turnips or garlic sauce in the falafel sandwich. Later, as the years developed and as the years rolled by as well, that falafel stand was replaced by one of my favorite fish restaurants in Bethlehem, and that was more of an ecumenical tradition. I was old enough then, when I was visiting the Holy Land, Israel and Palestine, to go to Bethlehem and meet friends in their churches. For instance, Reverend Dr. Mitri Rahib, who was then the pastor of the Christmas church in Bethlehem, or other churches as well. And that was part and parcel of what I used to do in all the countries where I found myself during my younger years. Of course, as a student in France with that famous Bûche de Noël, in the UK, of course, as a law student, in Cyprus when I was working, and they have some very nice traditions, particularly for New Year's Eve, and even sometimes in Germany. But this year, all these memories came flooding by when I was watching a virtual Christmas carol that was being played out at Our Lady of Victory's Catholic Church, just down the road from where I live in Kensington, London. And an Anglican bishop, Michael Langrish, basically took the sermon and talked about the whole idea of Christmas and those Christian communities that live there. Christian communities, incidentally, that are not Australian, British, French, Canadian, Japanese, or South African. They actually are indigenous. They were born there, they grew up there, and they are in their majority Arabs. So as I was listening to his sermon, as I was listening to the choir and the fantastic organist Timothy, I thought to myself, who are these Christians we talk so much about, that the West always says, oh, the Christians of Iraq, the Christians of Lebanon, the Christians of Syria, the Christians of Jordan, the Christians of Palestine and Israel, euphemistically the Holy Land. Well, first point I'd make is that they're an ever-dwindling community in numbers. If I take the Christians of Palestine, for instance, if you go back to 1948, if you go back 40, 50, 60 years, and then come back to 2021, you can see that there were about 25% Christians in the Holy Land then, and now hardly 2%. But as I've always said, it's not only numbers that count. If you actually go back to the early church, who were they? A bunch of ragged, higgledy-piggledy men and women who half the time didn't know what the dickens they were doing, and who were trying to profess and build a new link to what became a religion and what we know as Christianity. So in a sense, it's not the numbers, but the numbers also are telling, because it shows you that people who've lived for decades and decades, sometimes centuries, in these lands have actually left. Some of them for political reasons, others for personal reasons, but largely due to economic reasons. And what we see today across Libya, across the Ukrainian-Belarusian frontier, what we see of people rushing to Europe, to the West, this is mostly economic. Whether you call them migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, the large number of them are economic migrants, but also some of them are in desperate need to get out of their countries because their lives are in danger. However, the fact that there were 25% indigenous Christians in the Holy Land a few decades ago, and now it's only 2%, does not belittle the nature and standard of witness and service and interaction that these Christians have. Just go and have a look for yourselves. The hospitals, the old people's homes, the clubs, the schools in Gaza, where out of 1.8 million, there are hardly a couple of 100, 300 Christians. They have some huge humanitarian work that is being achieved there. If you go to the West Bank, of course, Jerusalem, the involvement and the contribution of these communities, men and women and even children, is quite remarkable. And perhaps they differ from one country to another in the region. Unlike places like Lebanon and Iraq, for instance, Palestinian Christians feel very much part of the same society. They do not necessarily always hide behind the sectarian etiquettes and labels too much. In their majority, I believe, those Christians are also Palestinian. They're not necessarily first and foremost Latins, Armenian Orthodox, Copt, Syriac Orthodox, Lutherans, Anglicans, what have you. They are also Palestinians, either in their ethnicity or in their culture. And the Christian of Bethlehem, of Jerusalem, of Ramallah, of Nablus are also Muslims insofar as their cultural norms go. And this is something that the West has problems accepting, that when you live and grow up in a culture where there is an intermingling, an interweaving of men and women. When I was a toddler, going back to my times in Jordan and across the region, many Muslim neighbors would come and have lunches with us, would visit us in the evening for an ice cream or a cup of coffee. There was an osmosis. Nobody could say that we were living in an Armenian Christian ivory tower or in a cocoon. No, we were part and parcel of the same community. And for those who say, oh yes, but you're Armenian. Yes, I'm Armenian ethnically. So are a few of the Copts and Syriacs in the land as well. But they, in their majority, also feel Palestinian insofar as their national aspirations. But having said all that, and having literally touched the surface of this whole subject that I'm trying to compress in some 15 or odd minutes in this YouTube number 37, I would also say, and this is what Bishop Michael Langrish focused on in his sermon, perhaps a little bit too much, that they're also in dire need of help, sustenance, support. Because a lot of them are needy, a lot of them are poor. And this is why there are so many organizations, both local and international, that try to help them as well as their Muslim neighbors. You can take the Middle East Council of Churches, which has been working there for many, many decades. You can take Friends of the Holy Land. You can take the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. You can take Christian Aid, which I'm very fond of. You can take the Methodist and Presbyterian churches in the USA, who help immeasurably with a lot of the projects in this land in order to help a people who, let us not forget, when we talk Holy Land, when we talk West Bank, when we talk East Jerusalem, when we talk Gaza, are occupied territory. So they're not only people who are facing the economic woes that others are facing, either in the region or across the world, but they're people who are also under the yoke of oppression due to an occupation that has been relentless for decades and decades. And these organizations help them. But these Arab Christians, in their majority, what do they do? Why are they also important? What role, other than the ones I've just touched upon, do they fulfill? One key role for them is that they're a bridge, a connection to the outside world through their connections. I've told you about a few of the many organizations that help. Caritas is another one, for instance. Now, when a Christian from Jerusalem, from Ramallah, from Tulkarem, from Beit Sahur, from Bethlehem, from Gaza, comes and says, listen, guys, I need your help. There is a common inheritance, no matter the divisions, no matter the fanciful sophistry and theosophy with which the clerics try to identify their brand of Christianity. For most people, it's not really that important. When that person, that man or woman says, please help me, that voice is resonant in the West, in the United States, in North America, in Western Europe, elsewhere, in Africa even. I have been involved in the past with so many projects that basically brought together Palestinians, Northern Irish, and South African Christians to try and help each other. And when I keep saying Christians, because it's one of my identities, it's not a jingoism. For me, my faith is personal, but it is also one of my standards. So these people reach out to their sisters and brothers, to their compatriots abroad, and those people help. They also explain the reality of what is happening in the country, how they are surviving despite the insuperable obstacles, despite all the oppression that you hear about. I mean, take one example, take Sheikh Jarrah, the hashtag that made so much noise, Muhammad al-Kurd and his daughter and his twin sister Muna. I mean, we talked about the eviction of those Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah homes. they are Palestinians, both Christian and Muslim. I know the region quite well. There are a few consulates there that I used to visit regularly every month as part of my track to responsibilities. So this is what these people are also doing in serving a national cause, which in their case is the Palestinian cause, but then there are others as well in other countries that I've just mentioned at the beginning of this short episode. So, a motley bunch, I suppose, like any other motley bunch. They're no better and no worse than most people. Their circumstances might be more testing, more trying, but they're still, in my opinion, a motley bunch. They aren't more special, except perhaps in the fact, and it is an important fact, that their faith, the Christian faith, the story, which has been transcribed in the Bible many decades after Jesus's birth, death, resurrection, and ascension, their story unfurled in these lands, in these biblical lands. And these biblical lands are not only that tiny sliver of land we call Palestine, but I would go and include Palestine, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, Iraq, Egypt, in all these, Syria, in all these countries. Part of that story has unfurled, and it always goes back. So guys, when you go and sing, open your hymn books and sing in your respective churches, or when at night over the roasted turkey, you start singing a French carol, for instance, Il est né le divin enfant, or one of those many, many familiar and beautiful English Christmas carols, remember that you are also talking about a faith that started many, many thousand miles ago, and some people have died for the sake of that faith. So let's not be too uppity about it, and let's remember the story as it unfurled in these lands. And this is why I always tell people when they come and start talking to me about these lands, I say, and these living stones, as they sometimes are called. And I think sometimes it's a bit too much when you keep talking about them as living stones. Fine. We know it's like calling the Lebanese all the time resilient. They get fed up with it. What I always tell people, if you really want to know what's happening there, visit them. Let them tell you their stories. Do not presume that you know their stories beforehand. And that applies to everywhere, I suppose, but it certainly applies to that part of the world. So in conclusion, to all friends, all associates, all those with whom I have contact daily or weekly or monthly or hardly ever at all, and who are Christians who originally hail from that neck of the woods, I say Eid Milad Majid to you all, a merry and blessed Christmas to you all, and a happy end of 2021, despite the dreadful and limiting constraints of COVID-19 with all its multiple variants. So enjoy yourselves, have fun. This is a period of fun. This is not a period of mourning and feeling all depressed, but it is a time where memory should also remind us that there are people there who were Christian before you here and who are still there witnessing to their faith. And in their majority, they are Arabs. Merry Christmas to you all.